Stop and listen closely, because no one's ever had the guts to tell you this. There's a spiritual secret so powerful that if you remember it now, nothing and no one will ever be able to control you again. And this secret has been hidden for centuries, but Thoth revealed exactly where to find it. But hold on, it's not just ancient history. I'm going to show you how, the moment you understand this, your soul will remember who you really are. And everything that feels confusing in your life right now will begin to organize itself effortlessly. Do you know why you feel that emptiness, that sense that something's missing? Because the whole world has been programmed to make you forget your true essence. They taught you to be someone you're not. And while you live in that forgetting, you obey, you consume, you hide. But today, that's going to change. I'm about to show you where the secret that Thoth protected is hidden. But first, you need to understand something. Everything you're searching for out there is already inside you, just waiting for you to remember. And at the end of this video, I'm going to reveal where that memory is hidden. Not in an ancient temple, not in a sacred book, but in something you carry every day and never noticed. Ready? Because once you hear this, there's no going back. Now that you know they hid the key that sets your soul free, it's time to reveal where it's been hidden for centuries. And the most amazing part? Civilizations that never physically met, separated by oceans and mountains, spoke of the exact same thing. How is that possible? There was no internet, no phones, no shared books back then, and still, in Egypt, India, and Greece, masters said that at birth, the soul doesn't awaken, it falls asleep. To the modern man, birth is the beginning of everything, but to these ancient cultures, birth was the beginning of forgetting. They believed the soul came from a place where everything was clear, where there was no separation, where the memory of your true self was alive and pulsing. But upon entering the physical body, something happens, as if a veil was placed over your eyes, as if a fog covered what you once knew but can no longer access. In Egypt, Thoth said the body is not the problem. The problem is believing you are only the body. In India, the ancient sages called this forgetting Maya, the great illusion. In Greece, the Orphic philosopher said the soul fell into a cycle of repetition and imprisonment, forgetting its divine origin. See the similarity? Completely different peoples, speaking the same truth. But there's something even more curious. They didn't record this knowledge in texts accessible to just anyone. It wasn't published in scrolls displayed in public squares. Much less were there public lectures. This kind of wisdom was passed on silently, from master to disciple, in private meetings, in closed chambers, inside temples where few were allowed to enter. Why? Because they knew not everyone was ready to handle this truth. If an ordinary person, unprepared emotionally and spiritually, accessed this knowledge, their ego could use it to feel superior, to manipulate others, or even to escape reality instead of transforming it. These masters knew that true wisdom can only be passed on when the heart is clean. It's not enough to want to know. You have to be ready to live what you discover. That's why, in the temples of Egypt, in the ashrams of India, and in the mysteries of Greece, silence was the greatest guardian of this secret. Because silence doesn't lie. Those who sought quick answers left empty-handed. Those who remained in silence began to hear something that wasn't written anywhere. But what exactly happened inside these temples? What kind of experience could make a soul that had forgotten its origin finally remember who it is? What was the hidden process kept under lock and key that completely transformed those who went through it? That's what you're about to begin discovering. In the next part, we're going to walk through the doors of those temples and reveal what happened in the secret chambers where few dared to enter. Get ready, because what you're about to see is not a symbolic ritual. It's an experience so deep, it changes the soul forever. And when the doors of those temples finally close behind the chosen ones, what happened inside wasn't a ceremony to impress anyone. There was no audience, no performance. There was only silence and darkness, because before the soul could remember who it was, it first had to forget who it thought it was. And that's where the crossing began, a crossing few could endure. The initiates were led to an isolated space, without light or sound. There, they were taken into a deep state of stillness, where even thoughts seemed to make no sense. And little by little, something inside them began to unravel. It wasn't the physical body, but the persona they had carried for years. All the stories they told about themselves began to collapse. The name, the profession, the status, the opinions, none of it mattered anymore. Thoth taught that this was the most critical moment, the instant when the ego, realizing it no longer had control, tried to resist. It would throw fears, doubts, and even false visions to keep the initiate tied to the old self. Because for the ego, death is unacceptable, even if that death is only symbolic. And here's the most shocking part of the process. The initiate didn't receive new information. No one explained the meaning of life to them. No master told them what to do next. Because true knowledge doesn't come from the outside. It comes when everything falls away, and what's left is what was always there but had been forgotten. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to face absolute emptiness. No labels, no beliefs, no stories to cling to. Just you, naked before your own consciousness. For many, this moment was unbearable. Some gave up halfway, others went mad, trying to quickly rebuild their masks. But the few who stayed, they experienced something that changed everything. They realized there was nothing new to learn. What happened was the opposite. They remembered. They remembered a truth so deep that no words could describe it. It was as if, for a moment, everything made sense. Existence, the universe, life, and death. Everything fit together in absolute silence. But not everyone was ready for that. And here comes Thoth's warning. Crossing that portal unprepared was dangerous, because remembering too soon could break the mind. Imagine someone carrying unresolved traumas, unprocessed fears, and suddenly gaining access to the vastness of what they truly are. It could be too much to handle. And that was the greatest risk, to cross unprepared and get lost along the way. Because once you see what's on the other side, you can't unsee it. But what if you don't know what to do with it? What if your mind tries to distort what your soul saw, creating yet another illusion instead of freedom? That's why the masters warned, don't seek this crossing out of curiosity. Don't walk this path just because you want quick answers. Because if you try to remember who you are without first clearing the ground of your consciousness, you might end up creating even more confusion. And now the inevitable question arises. What happens to someone who crosses unprepared? What happens when someone accesses this deep remembrance without having the inner structure to hold it? That answer begins in the next part. Because what Thoth revealed about the dangers of this journey will show you why so many still live trapped in an invisible cycle, even after touching great spiritual truths. And now that you know the risk of accessing who you are without being ready, it's clear that there's a first obstacle in the way. An invisible obstacle that controls almost everything in your life. Thoth called it the lie of the self. And this is where most give up without even realizing it, because after all, who has the courage to look in the mirror and admit they spent their whole life believing an illusion about themselves? That's the first barrier. It's not outside. It's not some external force trying to stop you. It's inside. It's the sum of everything you believe you are. The problem is, from a young age, You were conditioned to believe things that weren't yours. Someone told you what to think about love, success, failure, and even about yourself, and you believed it. Not out of malice, but because no one taught you to question it. Now I ask you, how many times in your day do you stop and observe your own thoughts? How many times have you asked yourself where they come from? Because most of what you think every day isn't actually your creation. They're automatic repetitions of what you heard, saw, or experienced in the past. They're programs running in silence, like an app you don't even know is open, but that's draining all your energy. And this is where the first real practice of this path comes in. No distant mysticism. It's simple, direct, and difficult at the same time. Observe a negative thought that comes up in your mind. Pick one of those that always show up when you're tired, insecure, or frustrated. Now ask the question Thoth used to teach his disciples. Is this really mine? Or did someone put this in me? It sounds simple, but that question can crack open structures you've carried for years. Because when you start to realize that much of your emotional pain didn't come from your essence, but was learned, something begins to break inside. It's not destruction. It's liberation. Every thought you question is a chain that falls away. But here's the delicate part. The ego, which was built exactly to protect this false identity, will fight. It'll try to convince you that letting go of these beliefs is dangerous. It'll say that without these thoughts, you'll lose who you are. But the truth is, you were never those thoughts. They were just crutches for a self that didn't want to look into the void. And in that void, something starts to happen. When the old stories fall away, a silence appears. At first, that silence might feel scary. After all, you spent your whole life filling the silence with mental noise, but over time, you begin to realize that silence isn't empty, it's space. Space for something new to be born, or better, for something old to return. Because when the first illusion falls, what's been asleep since your birth begins to wake up. It's not a new skill or a power someone's going to give you. It's a silent memory that starts to rise like an echo inside of you. And when it starts to surface, everything you believed about life begins to lose meaning. You can no longer live like before. The things that once motivated you now seem small. The arguments that used to occupy your mind now feel empty. And even though the world around you stays the same, something inside has already changed. And that change is just the beginning. Because when that something awakens, it begins to guide your life in a way you've never experienced before. But what exactly is this silent presence that begins to rise when the false identity falls? How does it guide you? And why can almost no one sustain it for long? And when that memory starts to awaken inside you, something curious happens. For the first time, you realize there's a way of seeing that doesn't depend on your eyes. A silent perception that doesn't analyze, judge, or interpret. It simply sees. Thoth called it the single eye. Not a physical eye, not a mystical symbol, but a state of perception where truth doesn't need to be explained because it's already felt before it even becomes a thought. And maybe this has already happened to you, even if just for a few seconds. You know when you walk into a place and, without any logical explanation, feel that something's off? Or when you meet someone and, despite all the polite words, you feel something's being hidden? That's the single eye working without you realizing it. It's your soul picking up on the truth beyond the appearance. But why is this sense so dimmed in most people? Because since you were born, you were taught to trust what you see more than what you feel. Society praised reasoning, logic, data, and forgot about the silent intuition that's always been there. The problem is, the eyes see what's on the surface. The single eye senses what's underneath. And here's the first simple, but transformative practice that Thoth left for his disciples. Close your eyes for a moment and stop searching for answers. Quiet the noise running in your head. Don't expect anything grand to happen. Just stay silent for 10 seconds. 10 seconds where you don't search, don't think, don't expect. Just feel. In that small space of silence, something begins to emerge. At first it might feel like nothing, but actually, that nothing is everything. Because it's in the silence that the single eye awakens. That's where, for a brief moment, you step out of the mental noise and realize there's something bigger happening inside you. Something that has no name, no form, and doesn't need explanations. And why is that so important? Because as long as you seek answers in the mind, all you'll find are concepts. But when you begin to feel with this direct perception, the answers don't come as thoughts. They come as clarity. A clarity that doesn't need words because it's already whole in itself. But here comes a crucial point. This perception is only the beginning. It's like opening a crack in a door that's been locked for years. The light starts to come in, but there's still something deeper hidden on the other side. Because realizing the truth is one step, but living from it is a completely different one. And that next step involves something no one else can give you. No master, no book, no video. Because what comes next is the unique vibration of your soul, something that can't be taught, something only you can feel. And that's exactly what you're going to start seeking from now on. In the next part, you'll discover that there's a silent frequency inside you, a sound that has never been spoken in words, but has been vibrating silently since the day your soul first awakened. And when you find that sound, everything starts to make sense. There's something vibrating inside you from the very beginning of your existence. It's not a voice with words. It's not a sound you can reproduce with your mouth or hear with your ears. It's a silent frequency, a vibration so intimate that most people go their whole lives without realizing it's there. Thoth called it the invisible name. But it's not a name like John, Mary, or anything else. It's the sound that describes who you truly are without needing a single letter. And maybe you've already felt it without being able to explain. You know that moment of sudden peace, when, for a second, everything feels right, even though nothing outside has changed. Or that strong intuition that comes out of nowhere, when your mind's still confused but something inside you already knows what to do. It's in those little silences, in those subtle moments, that this vibration shows up. Not as a thought, but as a silent certainty. And why do we call it the invisible name? Because unlike the names they gave you out here, this name doesn't limit you. It doesn't define you by profession, nationality, or appearance. It's the pure vibration of your essence. It's your soul's signature in the universe. And no one can copy that. It's unique, only yours. The craziest part is that, even without knowing, you've already heard this sound. Not with your ears, but with your heart. And it's been calling you since you were born. But the noise of the world and the voices in your mind drowned it out. The busy life, the worries, the distractions, all of that piled on layer after layer over that original vibration. But it never disappeared. It just went dormant, waiting for you to finally create enough silence to hear it again. And when you start hearing that inner sound, something changes in how you see the world. You realize that the answers you were searching for outside were always inside. That the feeling of emptiness wasn't the lack of something external, but the absence of that inner connection. And when that connection happens, there's no going back to who you were before. But pay attention, because here comes an important point. When that vibration awakens, it doesn't just bring light and peace, it begins to shine a light on everything that's been hidden inside you, even the parts you tried to forget, traumas, fears, and memories you buried deep so you wouldn't feel them anymore. all of that starts to rise because your soul's sound doesn't just remind you who you are, it also reminds you of what you tried to erase, and that's the next door you'll have to go through. Because remembering who you are isn't just about feeling peace and light, it's also about having the courage to look at the parts you've hidden. And when those parts come up, you have two choices: run from them and go back to the illusion, or go through them and finally set yourself free. And it's in that moment, when the silent sound of your soul begins to vibrate stronger, that something inevitable happens. Along with the memory of who you truly are come the memories of what hurt you along the way. Because there's no real light that doesn't shine on hidden shadows. And this is where many people give up. Because it's easy to seek peace, but not everyone is willing to face the pain. Thoth called this process soul purification. Not as punishment or suffering imposed by someone else, but as a natural cleansing. Imagine your soul like a river that, over time, got full of rocks and debris. The flow is still there, but it's blocked. The purification process is nothing more than letting that water run freely again. But to do that, you have to have the courage to look at everything that's been jammed in there. And what pains are those? They're the ones you tried to forget. Childhood wounds you never healed. Words that hurt you and that you repeated silently to yourself for years. Situations that made you believe you weren't enough, that you didn't deserve love, that you couldn't trust people. All of that got stored deep in your memory, hidden because it hurt too much to remember. But here comes the most important revelation of this part. The suffering only keeps existing because you reject it. Every time you run from the pain, it grows. Every time you hide what you feel, it becomes a weight inside you. But the moment you choose to look at it without running, something different happens. The pain begins to dissolve. Not because you fight it, but because you finally embrace what you spent your whole life denying. It's like telling yourself, yes, that happened. Yes, I suffered. But that doesn't define who I am. And in that moment, the pain loses its control over you. It becomes just a memory, no longer a prison. And you know what happens when that purification starts to take place? Your soul begins to take over your life. For the first time, your mind stops being the commander and becomes just a tool. Because up until now, it was the mind setting the pace. It decided what you believed, what you feared, what you avoided. But when the soul awakens, it doesn't shout orders. It leads in silence, with clarity and peace. And this is the point where many people, for the first time, feel a kind of inner silence unlike anything they've ever experienced. It's not emptiness, it's fullness. It's not the absence of thoughts, but the freedom of not being ruled by them. But now comes the question that opens the next level of this journey. If now the soul is the one leading, what happens to the mind that, for so long, was in charge? Is it just going to disappear? Or will it try to regain control somehow? In the next part, you'll discover what really happens when the soul takes the wheel and the mind loses the throne it held for so long. Until now, you've been clearing away the veils that were hiding your essence. But when those veils fall and your soul finally awakens, a change so deep appears that there's no going back. From here on out, your life will no longer be driven by the mind's automatic reactions. You begin to experience something rare, a life led by consciousness, not by fear. Thoth called it the waking trance. But pay attention. Don't confuse this with a hypnotic trance where you lose awareness of yourself. It's the opposite. Here, you're more conscious than ever. Your soul observes everything, feels everything, but is no longer dragged by emotional waves or anxious thoughts. It's like you're in the middle of a noisy crowd, but inside, there's such a deep silence that nothing can pull you out of that center. This state isn't an escape from life. It's not isolation. It's life lived with full presence. You still have your responsibilities, your challenges, your relationships. But now, instead of being a character inside the story, you become the author watching each scene unfold. Your mind still thinks, but you no longer believe everything it says. Your emotions still arise, but you don't react automatically to them. You feel, but you don't get lost in it. And something extraordinary happens in that moment. Time, which used to feel like the enemy, slows down. That constant feeling of rushing, of being late, of never having enough hours in the day disappears. Because when you're present, time doesn't run. It stretches. Each moment, no matter how simple, becomes deep. You could be washing dishes or walking down the street and still feel a peace that used to seem impossible in the middle of daily life. On top of that, the emotions that used to dominate you lose their power. Anger doesn't control you anymore because you watch it arise and let it go without clinging to it. Anxiety doesn't paralyze you because you see it's just a fast-moving thought trying to predict the future. Sadness doesn't turn into despair because you embrace it without identifying with it. It's like your soul is saying, "I'm here, nothing can shake me." And with that, an internal space appears where, for the first time, you can choose. Not react automatically, not repeat old patterns, but choose. Choose what to feel, what to think, how to act. This inner freedom is something the ego could never give you. Because the ego lives off conditioning, off automatic responses, off unconscious impulses. The soul doesn't. It's free. It observes, understands, and acts from clarity, not from a need to control. But maybe the biggest transformation is in how you begin to see the world around you. Because when your soul takes over, you no longer see people as enemies, competitors, or threats. You start to realize that each person carries their own pain and confusion, just like you carried not long ago. And that awakens compassion. Not that forced compassion that says you have to love everyone, but true, silent compassion that understands without needing to justify. Now here's the question most people don't want to ask. Is it possible to live like this all the time? Because in the silence of a temple, at a spiritual retreat, or in meditation, it seems easy to keep that clarity. But what about when you return to the real world? The chaotic traffic, the tight deadlines, the family and work conflicts. Can that inner peace survive the collision with everyday life? This is where most people stumble. Because the mind, which stayed quiet for a while, starts trying to take back control. It whispers, "This is nice, but it doesn't work in the real world." And if you believe that, you go back to the old pattern, back to autopilot, to rushing, to constant worry, because the real challenge isn't waking up. The real challenge is staying awake in the middle of the chaos. And this is where the real learning begins, because remembering who you are in a quiet temple is easy. What's hard is remembering who you are when your boss is pressuring you, when someone criticizes you unfairly, when life feels unfair. It's in those moments that you'll find out if your soul really took over, or if it was just a fleeting glimpse. In the next part, we're going to dive into that challenge, how to sustain this state of presence in the middle of the world, how to not get lost again in old habits, because your soul has already awakened. But will the mind accept taking the back seat? Or will it fight to reclaim the throne? This is where the test begins, the one that separates those who live a superficial awakening from those who truly embody the soul's truth. Because remembering who you are in silence with your eyes closed is easy. The real challenge is when you go back to the noise of the world and try to keep that memory alive while everything around you tries to make you forget. Thoth used to say, "The true alchemist is the one who walks awake among the asleep and doesn't let them put him back to sleep." That sentence says it all. Because the world won't stop so you can keep your peace. The demands continue. The traffic continues. The news keeps bombarding you with fear and scarcity. And the people around you, often unconscious, keep trying to pull you back into the same old game. But this is where you choose who's in charge, your soul or the noise of the world. In practice, this starts with small acts. The first is conscious presence. This means being where your body is. If you're washing dishes, be there. If you're in a conversation, be present. Don't let your mind run off into the future or get lost in the past. It sounds simple, but it's constant training, because the mind, used to running on autopilot, will always try to escape. The second step is cultivating active silence. You can be in the middle of an argument and still maintain a space of silence inside. You can be in a noisy environment and still keep a part of you at peace. It's not about shutting your mouth. It's about not reacting automatically. It's that small space between stimulus and response where you choose how you want to act instead of just reacting. And the third point is paying attention to what you consume, because everything you watch, hear, and say feeds your vibration. If you consume fear-based news, your vibration drops. If you're around people who constantly complain, your energy goes down. If you spend the day on empty social media, your focus gets lost. That's why choosing what enters your mind is an act of spiritual protection. Over time, this constant practice transforms your life. Situations that used to throw you off now become neutral scenarios where you decide how you want to act. People who used to provoke you no longer have power over you because your peace doesn't depend on them. And the chaos of the world, which used to crush you, now seems small next to the vastness of your consciousness. But here's the detail Thoth warned about. The mind doesn't like losing control. It will try to take its place back. It'll try to convince you that you're wasting time, that this is nonsense, that there's no way to live like this in the real world. And in that moment, you need to remember who's in charge. If you keep up this practice, something extraordinary starts to happen. Your perception expands to the point where you start accessing memories that had been hidden until now. Memories that don't belong just to this life. You start having flashes of other times, other places, other existences. It might come as a very vivid dream, a strong intuition, or that déjà vu feeling, even if logic says it's impossible. It's not imagination. It's your soul accessing records that were always there, but that your limited mind could never understand. And here a new question arises. If these memories are coming back, what else does your soul know that you haven't remembered yet? What secrets are still hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? That's exactly what we're going to start uncovering in the next part. Because remembering who you are in this life is just the beginning. The true awakening happens when you access everything your soul has always been. And when those memories begin to rise, you realize something that forever changes how you see your own existence. Because what you thought was the beginning of your story, your birth, is just a small comma in a much older text. Thoth spoke clearly. Your soul wasn't born with your body. The body is temporary, but the soul spans ages. It's been many things before becoming who you think you are now. And those memories didn't disappear. They just went dormant, waiting for you to be ready to remember. But these memories don't show up like scenes from an old movie. They appear disguised in your daily life, in patterns that repeat and you can't explain. Why do you always attract the same kind of situation, the same type of person, the same challenge? Why, even after changing cities, jobs, relationships, do certain feelings keep coming back? It's because your soul is trying to show you something unresolved from other journeys. Every repetitive situation that deeply bothers you is an echo of something you lived before that still needs understanding. And those ancient memories don't show up just to remind you of what was hard. They also bring talents you carry without knowing why. That ease you have with learning certain things, the natural connection you feel with distant cultures, the deep interest in topics most people don't even notice. All of that are signs of experiences your soul has already lived in other times and places. And the more you connect with your essence, the more those forgotten abilities begin to show up spontaneously. But this is the point where many people get lost. Because as they start accessing these memories, the mind tries to turn them into stories, into logical explanations, into narratives that satisfy curiosity. But soul memories aren't here to feed the ego. They're here to free your consciousness. If you try to control the process, you just end up creating new illusions instead of finding the truth. And now that the memories of other lives have started to reveal themselves, a new dilemma shows up in front of you. Because when those memories come, they don't arrive organized, easy, or logical. They come as fragments, as old feelings you can't figure out alone. And this is where many people trip. Faced with the unknown inside, most run outside, searching for books, teachers, gurus, more and more courses. In a desperate attempt to organize what they're feeling, they hand over their own journey to someone who can't live it for them. But Thoth was crystal clear about this. The true master, the one who can guide you through paths no one else can see, has never been outside. He's always been within. And he doesn't use human words. He speaks through your awakened consciousness. A silent, subtle voice that doesn't try to convince you of anything, but knows exactly what to do when you quiet the distractions. This inner voice doesn't speak through logic, but through felt truth. It shows up as that certainty that comes before thought even starts, like that sense of peace that, even in doubt, makes you realize you're on the right path. That's why it goes unnoticed by those who only live in the noise of the mind. If you expect the inner master to speak with clear explanations, you'll miss the chance to hear him. So how do you start accessing this voice in real life? Not by looking for more information, but by asking fewer outside questions and creating more inner silence, by making space between one thought and another. Because while you're chasing quick answers, you're closing the door through which the master wants to speak. He doesn't compete with your anxiety. He waits for you to get still. That's why one essential exercise is simple. In front of any decision, pause. Close your eyes. Breathe and feel. Don't think. Feel. What comes first, before any thought? What rises in the empty space before your mind starts to argue? That's the voice. It won't try to convince you. It'll just show you. But to see it, you have to be willing to look without expectation. Over time, you'll notice that this voice doesn't give you instant comfort. Sometimes it points to the hardest path, because it's not interested in keeping you comfortable. It wants you to grow, to remember. And remembering isn't always comfortable. That's why so many people run from true intuition, because it doesn't tell the ego what it wants to hear. It tells the soul what it needs to do, and this is where Thoth believed the greatest test of all begins. When you start accessing this inner voice and feeling its silent truth, the mind realizes it's losing control, and that's when it creates its most sophisticated trap. It puts on a spiritual mask. It'll whisper, "Now you're different from everyone else. Now you know more. Now you're above the world." It'll try to make you believe you're special, that you're superior, that you've arrived where no one else has. And if you believe that, you fall into the trap that catches thousands of spiritual seekers along the path: spiritual ego. Now we arrive at the most delicate and dangerous part of the spiritual journey, the one Thoth called the final enemy. Not an enemy that screams from the outside, but a whisper that comes from within. A whisper so soft, so seductive, that many believe it's the voice of enlightenment itself. It's the ego, but not the ordinary ego that craves power, money, or status. We're talking about the ego that puts on a mask of light, that disguises itself as a master, a guide, a savior, and that's what makes it the most dangerous of all. Thoth said the final trap isn't in the outside world, it's in the subtle pride that shows up when someone starts to see themselves as special for having awakened. That's when the seeker risks getting lost right where they thought they'd been found, because the true prison isn't ignorance, it's pride disguised as wisdom. See the danger. The ego doesn't disappear when you step onto the spiritual path. It just changes clothes. It takes off the obvious masks of worldly vanity and puts on robes of purity and compassion. But behind that disguise, it's still feeding separation. When you start thinking, I'm an awakened being, different from those who are still asleep, you've already fallen into the trap. Because where there's separation, there's no unity. And where there's no unity, there's no real enlightenment. That's why so many people who chase the light end up, without realizing it, creating a new kind of darkness, spiritual judgment. They look at the world and feel superior for understanding what others don't yet see. They confuse knowledge with consciousness. They confuse information with transformation. And they forget that real light doesn't scream, doesn't show off, doesn't impose. It just exists, silent and present, lighting everything around it without needing recognition. So how do you know you've fallen into this game? Thoth taught that the spiritual ego reveals itself when you feel the need to tell others how they should live, when you silently judge those still stuck in patterns you've already overcome, when you feel impatient with those who don't evolve at your pace. True light doesn't need anyone to keep up. It walks alone in peace, without hurry and without pressure. Watch your reactions. When someone questions your spiritual beliefs, how do you respond? With calm or with defensiveness? With openness or resistance? The spiritual ego always wants to be right, always wants the last word, even if it uses sweet and peaceful words to hide its pride. But awakened consciousness doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't need to prove anything. It knows every soul has its own time and path, and because of that, it doesn't interfere with anyone else's process. And there's something even more subtle. The spiritual ego, in its final disguise, starts to take pride in its own humility. It says things like, I've already overcome the ego. I'm just a channel for the light. But if you look closely, these statements hide a quiet need for recognition. As Thoth warned, the true wise one doesn't need to say they're wise. Their silent presence is enough. Here's the key. The ego feeds off the need to be someone special, even when that need is to be spiritually special. As long as there's a need to be someone, more awakened, more pure, more evolved, the ego is still present. True transcendence happens when you let go of even that need, when you no longer try to be someone, but just to be in the purest, quietest sense of the word. And this is where the spiritual journey becomes a paradox, because you don't fight the ego to defeat it. You simply stop feeding it. And how is it fed? Through comparison, through the silent competition of who's closer to the light. When you stop comparing yourself, when you stop measuring your growth against others, the ego starts to weaken. But few reach this point, because it's easier to fight the obvious ego than to recognize the subtle one. It's easier to give up worldly addictions than to silence the inner need to feel special. That's why Thoth said, stay watchful until your last breath, because the ego can hide in any corner of your consciousness. But there's a final test. Can you love someone who's still lost without needing to change them? Can you look at someone who's just starting their journey and see in them the same value you see in yourself? If the answer is yes, then you've started to dissolve the ego's last mask, because real love doesn't wait for change to love. It loves in the now, exactly where the other soul is, without conditions. But this stage isn't the end of the journey. It's just the preparation for the return to the source, the final stage that Thoth kept as the greatest mystery. A stage where there's no more I and other, no more path to walk, just being, pure and silent. And that's when the inevitable question comes. Are you ready to let go of even your spiritual identity? Because only those who pass through that final portal can, at last, return to the original state. And in that moment, something silent happens. There's no celebration, no fireworks. The ego expected a grand spectacle at the moment of final enlightenment. But what appears is a deep inner silence, a silence that doesn't ask for applause. That's when you realize that everything you were searching for, everything you were fighting to reach, was always present inside you, not as an achievement, but as an eternal presence that was never gone. Thoth called this moment conscious unity. Here, there's no more separation between you and the universe. There's no more seeker and sought, no more master and disciple. Everything is one field of consciousness, flowing effortlessly. You no longer feel the need to look for answers because you realize that life itself, in its simplicity, is already the answer. There are no more questions because there's no one left to ask. There is only being. And how does this show up in everyday life? In a surprisingly simple way. It's not an altered state where you float or leave your earthly responsibilities behind. On the contrary, conscious unity reveals itself when you breathe with presence, when you feel the wind on your skin, when you drink water and recognize the miracle in that simple act. It's in every ordinary gesture that now becomes sacred, not because it changed, but because your awareness changed. Here, spirituality is no longer something separate from life. It becomes life itself. You don't need elaborate rituals or complicated techniques to feel connected anymore. It's enough to be where you are, fully, without wanting to be anywhere else. It's a state of deep simplicity where the present is enough and there's no anxiety about what's to come. Thoth said the greatest spiritual realization is to live naturally, not with indifference, but with surrender. To breathe and feel life as it is, without trying to control it, without wishing it were different, because in that state, there's no resistance. And where there's no resistance, the energy of the source flows freely. But pay attention, because even in this stage, the mind may try to turn this experience into a new concept, into a new spiritual identity. It may try to explain it, label it, or overshare it, seeking recognition for having reached that state. But true conscious unity doesn't need to be explained. It can only be lived. It's not a title you wear, it's a silent way of being. And here's the most fascinating part. Even in unity, you're still human. You still feel emotions, still face challenges, still live in the world. But now, everything happens within a larger space, a space where suffering no longer holds you down, where joy doesn't need to last to be real. Because both pain and joy are recognized as temporary expressions of the same eternal consciousness. And here's where many people get it wrong. They think returning to the source means the end of practical life, as if someone who reached this state no longer has to pay bills, care for family, or deal with everyday things. But Thoth was clear. The return to the source doesn't pull you out of the world. It transforms the way you live in it. Everything still happens, but now you're no longer lost in the events. You observe them, participate in them, but without identifying with them. And when you reach this point, when everything becomes quiet and there's no more separation between you and the universe, that's when Thoth reveals the secret he never wrote down, but only whispered to those who were truly ready to hear. The secret isn't a hidden code or a forgotten technique in ancient scrolls. It's something much simpler, and for that very reason, much deeper. Thoth said, "Nothing can be lost within the soul. Everything can be remembered." That phrase, at first glance, might seem like just a nice metaphor, But if you dive into it, you'll realize the impact it has on your whole life. Since the beginning of your existence, since before your physical birth, you've carried within you all the wisdom, all the memory, and all the connection to the source. Even if the world made you forget, even if entire lifetimes passed and you believed you were lost, the truth never left you. It was only covered by layers and layers of forgetting. Imagine your soul as a deep, silent lake. On the surface, the waves of the world stir, creating distractions, fears, desires, and confusion. But deep down, the lake remains calm, untouched, holding the reflection of the truth that was never lost. Even when you feel disconnected, empty, or confused, that silent depth is still there, patiently waiting for you to remember. Thoth taught that forgetting is only a passing cloud, but the soul's memory is eternal. You may have identified for years with pain, trauma, failures, and illusions. You may have believed you lost your way, that you're far from the truth, that you drifted away from the source. But all of that is just stories from the mind, because in your essence, nothing was lost, only covered. And how do you access that memory? Not by trying harder, not by desperately searching for answers outside, but by entering a deep state of inner listening, because the soul doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear its whispers, you have to quiet the noise of the mind and personality. Thoth said remembering isn't a mental process, it's a spiritual recognition. It's not about bringing up past facts like reading an old book. It's about recognizing, in the present, what has always been there. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. The light doesn't create anything new, it just reveals what was already there, but invisible. And the most beautiful part of all this is that, even if you've spent entire lives far from this awareness, it doesn't judge you, it doesn't punish you, it doesn't demand anything from you. It just waits, silently, ready to be remembered the moment you're willing to stop looking outside and start feeling inside. That's why Thoth always emphasized, the true seeker isn't the one who collects knowledge, but the one who learns to be silent. Because in silence, you stop seeking and start remembering who you are, remembering what has always been beyond your roles, your fears, and your beliefs. And when that remembering happens, it doesn't need words. It's felt in the heart. And now, after everything you've gone through, after quieting the mind, passing through the illusions of the ego, and touching the forgotten memory of the soul, something finally happens. But not in the way you imagined. Not like an intellectual idea you repeat in your mind to convince yourself you've awakened. That would just be another layer of ego trying to take control. What happens now is a living remembrance. An experience that can't be put into words, but that silently transforms everything you feel, everything you perceive, and everything you are. When Thoth spoke of full awakening, he wasn't referring to some unreachable state reserved only for masters or faraway enlightened beings. He was talking about something that's available to any soul who decides to stop seeking outwardly and starts remembering inwardly. And here is the fulfilled promise from the beginning of your journey. When you practice what's been revealed, when you stop resisting and simply begin to be, the remembrance is no longer a theory. It becomes a living presence. And this is where you realize something fundamental. You're not the character living temporary dramas and stories. You're not the fear that's paralyzed you so many times. You're not the pain that marked you in hard moments. You're the one who witnessed it all. The one who was never touched by any of those experiences, even though you went through them. You're like the sky that stays untouched while dark or bright clouds pass by. The sky doesn't identify with the clouds, it just watches them. That's your essence. In that recognition, life continues happening around you, but you no longer get confused with it. Problems show up, but they don't define who you are. Emotions arise, but they don't drag you around like they used to. Even the spiritual challenges that once felt like obstacles are now seen as natural parts of the journey, not as threats. And here's the real forbidden secret, the one so many tried to hide over the ages. Because a human being who remembers who they truly are can no longer be controlled, can no longer be manipulated by outside systems, by limiting beliefs, by imposed fears, or by any structure that feeds on collective forgetting. When the soul remembers who it is, all attempts at control become useless. Because true power isn't outside. It never was. It's always lived silently inside you, waiting for the moment you'd stop and simply notice. This is the moment when fear disappears, because there's nothing left to protect, nothing left to chase. Everything that could be lost no longer defines who you are, and everything that could be gained doesn't add anything to what you've always been. It's a state of absolute freedom, not in the sense of doing whatever you want, but in the sense of no longer being a prisoner to anything. Not to circumstances, not to other people's opinions, not to the ups and downs of life. And when you live like this, there's no arrogance, no superiority, there's just peace. A quiet peace that walks with you in everything you do, because you no longer need to prove who you are. Life becomes light. Even in hard times, there's a calm no one can take from you, because your security no longer comes from the outside, it comes from within. But don't get it wrong. This doesn't mean you'll stop feeling or that your life will become perfect in the human sense. You'll still feel joy and pain, still face choices and challenges. The difference is that now you know all of that is just part of the temporary game of existence, and it doesn't touch who you really are. And because of that, suffering loses its weight. It still happens, but it doesn't pull you under anymore. Thoth said this is the true awakening, to remember who you've always been, even while playing the game of life, to live in the world without getting lost in it, to dance with existence, but never forget the silence watching the dance. And now, there's nothing more to seek, because what you've been looking for since the beginning has been inside you all along. And now, you don't just believe that as an idea, you feel it. And no one can take that feeling away from you. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has already started to remember. So tell me in the comments, what part of this message moved you the most? Write like this: I am remembering who I am. I want to see who really felt this happen now. Oh, and if you want to help this channel spread more content like this around the world, there's a special link in the first pinned comment for you to contribute directly and be part of this mission. Every bit of help you give helps this message reach those who need it most. And before you go, pay attention. I picked a special video here on the screen so we can keep going on this journey together. That's where I'll show you the next key to this awakening, so click on it and meet me there.